and justice for all. Now let me say that the struggle for civil rights is the struggle to make these two Americas one America is much more difficult today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. For about a decade or maybe 12 years, we struggled all across the South in glorious struggles to get rid of legal, overt segregation and all of the humiliation that surrounded that system of segregation. In a sense, this was a struggle for decency. We could not go to a lunch counter in so many instances and get a hamburger or a cup of coffee. We could not make use of public accommodations. Public transportation was segregated, and often we had to sit in the back, and within transportation within cities, we often had to stand over empty seats because sections were reserved for whites only. We did not have the right to vote in so many areas of the South. And the struggle was to deal with these problems. Now, certainly they were difficult problems. They were humiliating conditions. And by the thousands, we protested these conditions. We made it clear that it was ultimately more honorable to accept jail cell experiences than to accept segregation and humiliation. By the thousands, students and adults decided to sit in at segregated lunch counters to protest.
Dr. King, given Bill, a historical context, a chronology here, if you will, back then in '67, in terms of the resilient spirit of the civil rights movement, said we would in fact settle for jail cells, than the public humiliation that blacks were forced to go through. The question comes to mind, though, and that is, where is the spirit of resilience today?
Well, I think that spirit is still here. It's still inside of the folks that face these issues. The question is, how do you address issues today with the means to fix those issues today? It was a whole lot easier surprisingly, in 1965, 1963, 64, 65, to march against a Bull Connor, march against legal segregation. Those were relatively easily identifiable things that you could be against.
But it was also dangerous, though.
It was dangerous.
Climate.
It was dangerous. It was clearly dangerous, and one could lose their life in that process.
You can take an assassin's bullet, or you can disappear from your house in the middle of the night.
That's very true. But the thing is that they were easily identifiable and remediable things. You wanted to vote, then create legislation to allow people to vote. You wanted to live in a specific neighborhood, create legislation that would allow you. Today, what we're dealing with are things that are much more below the surface, almost invisible in a sense.
Right.
You often can't tell whether you've been denied a job because of your race, because people have gotten smart about how to do that.
Right.
You can't tell if you've been denied a loan because of your race, because it's so much easier to do that today, given the legal strictures. Even now, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which was designed to protect people, is being dismantled by President Trump. So it's a whole lot more difficult now to deal with issues because some of them are almost invisible.
Yeah. 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. We're discussing Dr. King ahead of MLK Day on Monday. In fact, what we'll do, this entire week, we will pick some of Dr. King's most consequential. All his speeches are important, but we'll review some of his speeches and have continued conversation over that. So tomorrow we'll have more of a similar conversation, looking at different angles in terms of where those speeches took us and what they were talking about. Let's go to Theo. Theo, and then Leon, I'm coming to you shortly, but Theo has a question or comment.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Happy Tuesday to both of you.
Thank you.
I believe I heard you say earlier, or the question is, what would Dr. King say today?
Right.
Well, it sounds as if that is assuming that he would have been watching what was going on in the city of Detroit. And the Dr. King that I remember, I think would have gotten involved. I don't think he would have been sitting somewhere watching this artificial bankruptcy in the city of Detroit. Remember, he came here and did his speech first.
Right.
So it seems to me that he was concerned about the fact that there was a large number of African Americans in the city of Detroit and knew that he would have support here. He was not from Alabama, yet he went to Alabama, where he was met with dogs and fire hoses, etc. So the same, I believe, he would have come to Detroit, and he would have rallied those who had the same concerns and wanted to fight against the elimination of black retirees. Now they are black city employees. He would have been able to show that the DIA would have a higher value than was reported. He would have been able to uncover a lot of facts and information to help people to fight against what was happening to the residents in the city of Detroit. So I don't believe that he would have been here today saying, oh, woe is us and what happened. I think he would have been involved, and I believe it would have turned out a lot different than it did.
All right. Thank you so much, Theo. Theo, for calling. Theo Broden from the Hood Research.
Theo raised an interesting point, and there's another side to this.
Mm-hmm.
The question in 1963, when Dr. King came here and gave that first "I Have a Dream" speech, Dr. King was invited here, and it was with the participation and support of many in the black ministry.
Right.
That
the
he
black
came
blood,
here.
yeah.
And the question today is,
Reverend C.L. Franklin and yeah.
That's right. Would those same ministers, or would ministers of today invite him in?
Yeah. But I think it's also interesting you mentioned that, of course, Dr. King's relationship with Aretha Franklin's father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, who was the head of the Detroit Human Rights Council. In fact, Dr. King, in his speech, the I Have a Dream draft, in his introductory salutation, actually mentioned C.L. Franklin. But at the same time, I think the Progressive National Baptist Convention was not supportive of Dr. King. There were lots of ministers that were not supportive of Dr. King.
There were two.
Right.
Let's be clear.
Yeah, let's make a distinction.
There was the National Baptist Convention, which was the one that did not support Dr.
Is that the
King.
one that evolved into the Progressive
and
Baptist?
then Dr. King formed the Progressive National Baptist Convention out of that organization to support his movement, to support the civil rights movement.
Right. So basically, it's almost like how it's almost like how the Anglican Church in the UK basically broke apart, and then you have the Methodist Church came out of the Anglican Church, came out of the then you have the Episcopal Church. So basically, the National Baptist Convention gave birth to the Progressive Baptist Convention, of course, by Dr. King. But in short, the ministers in this country, to a large extent, did not accept Dr. King, and his letter from the Birmingham jail did not help either.
Well, it made clear that there were many who were content to sit on the sidelines rather than actually getting into the fray. And even while Dr. King was in jail, there were those who were saying, "Hey, look, let's not rock the boat. We're doing okay here in Birmingham. Right. Don't mess it up.
You're raising too much hell." Yeah.
And we see that. We saw that. Most people aren't aware of how many other places turned their backs on Dr. King. Dallas, Texas, where I lived for a number of years, specifically asked him not to come to Dallas because he would rock the boat for black ministers and black folk in Dallas.
Right.
So the point is, here we have to recognize that Dr. King might be willing to do something, and I have no doubt that he would be willing today to work for change. But the question is, would he have helpmates in that change if he came to Detroit?
Yeah, because I think, in fact, history tells us that his speech on the war in Vietnam did not earn him many friends in the clergy community.
Well, no, it didn't. In fact, the speech on Vietnam, it resulted in many of his supporters, black and white, saying to him, why are you doing this? Because it is not your role to address the matter of the Vietnam War. That's a matter of foreign policy. In essence, what they were saying is that's for the white folks to deal with. That's not for you. Just stick to the stuff that you know, which is civil rights. What they failed to understand is, to the extent that $30-some billion a year in the 1960s were going to fight a war in Vietnam, were $30 billion that were not going to address poverty and racism here in the United States. And frankly, we are in the same doggone situation today with the trillions of dollars that have been devoted to a war on terror in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Pakistan. That's money that has not been used here in the United States to address the needs, the concerns, and the cares of people who need education, who need jobs, who need homes.
Let's go to Leon. Leon has a question or comment.
Yes, how are you today? I enjoy your show.
Thank you, brother.
To your question, what would Dr. King do today? In my humble opinion, I think that he would, because he was such a critical thinker and an intellectual, I think he would have come to the realization that although the fight he was fighting brought about some good, I think he would change strategies. And what I mean by that is, we're able to vote, but we don't vote. We're able to supposedly go to any school that we want to go to, but we don't value education. Segregation, but it's still, integration, but there's still redlining. So I think he would change the strategy and realize that the only way that we get ahead in America individually and collectively is that we establish economic power. You don't hear other ethnic groups marching to stay somewhere.
Yeah,
let me finish. Let me finish.
Go ahead.
Let me finish.
Go ahead.
Because that's what works in America. We're drenching in materialism in this country. So that's what works in this country, whether we want to realize that or not.
Mm-hmm.
50 years later, and you said it out of your own mouth, your guest, we're basically in the same situation, if not worse.
Mm-hmm.
So, what gains have we made?